days. I do a lot of toiling, no big deal. And I'm going to tell you right now, being a McDonald's All-American at 18 years old, being recruited by every school in the country, when it was time to decide what school I was going to go to, I decided to go to BC. And I had been on BC's campus for about 2 weeks, and Sports Illustrated called. And Sports Illustrated said, there's a chance you're going to be on the cover of the magazines between you, Ray Allen, Allen Iverson, Felipe Lopez. So at 18 years old, I went down to Faneuil Hall and I took pictures in my BC uniform, and 2 weeks later, the Sports Illustrated came out. Felipe Lopez got the cover and I got the inside fold, and it said, "The Big East is back." That night, Jim O'Brien called me, my basketball coach, and said, "Tonight, tomorrow night, there's going to be an assembly. There's going to be an assembly, and this former New York Giant is going to come in and talk to all Division I athletes about substance abuse." And I looked at Coach O'Brien and said, "Coach, come on, man. That's a joke. I'm not wasting my time going to this assembly." He said, "If you don't go to this assembly, Chris, you're going to be suspended 1 game." So I went into this assembly reluctantly, and I sat in the top left-hand corner. I listened to this former NFL football player tell his story. And I sat there and I had the nerve to make fun of this man. I had the nerve to talk while he was talking. I had the nerve to text while he was talking. And I said, "This is a joke. This would never happen to me. I could care less what this poor, pathetic 36-year-old is talking about." And after that assembly, I walked back to my dorm room, and when I went into my dorm room, how ironic it was. When I opened the door, there was a girl sitting at my desk with my roommate. And when I opened the door, they shifted. They shifted their body like they were hiding something. So I walked over to them and looked over their shoulder. When I looked over their shoulder, there was a big pile of cocaine. At 18 years old, I had never seen cocaine in my life. Cocaine to me was Len Bias. Lenny Bias was the second pick in the first round by the Boston Celtics. He was the next Michael Jordan. He was going to save the Celtics from Larry Bird time. Lenny Bias went out on draft and smoked cocaine, and his heart exploded. He died. So when I saw cocaine, I thought of Lenny Bias, and I immediately turned and I started walking out of the room. But as I was walking out of the room, the little 18-year-old girl that was sitting at my desk said, "Chris, where you going? Come back. It's not going to kill you." Those words spun me right around. As soon as I heard her voice and the words that she said, "It's not going to kill you," I turned around, I walked right back in the room, I sat at the desk. She said, "Put a little bit on your finger, put a little bit on your gums. Your mouth's going to get numb, and you'll see everything's okay." I put a little bit on my finger, I put a little bit on my gums, my mouth got numb. 2 minutes later, this little girl pushed out a line of cocaine. I looked at that line of cocaine. I'm going to tell you something from the bottom of my heart. I looked at that one line of cocaine and I said, "I'll do this once and I'll never do it again. I'll do this once, I'll never do it again." I grabbed the dollar bill, I snorted the line of cocaine at 18 years old. I had no idea that those words, "Come back, Chris, it's not going to hurt you," and my words, "I'll do this once and I'll never do it again," was going to take 14 years. It was going to take 14 years for me to put the dollar bill down. It was going to take 14 years to stop her. 2 days later, I got called into BC's training room for a drug test. All Division I athletes are subjected to random drug tests, and I walked in, I failed my first drug test for cocaine and marijuana. I got called into the athletic director's office, and he said, "This is a warning. The second one is a 1-game suspension. The third one will result in a 1-year suspension." In my first game at BC, I was going up for a layup. I landed funny. I broke my wrist. I had surgery, and my season was finished. There was no more basketball in my freshman season, and with no basketball, I jumped into partying thinking that the athletic department would stay away from me and not drug test me. Long story short, in my 3rd month, I failed my 2nd drug test, and in my 4th month, I failed my 3rd for cocaine. I got called into the athletic director's office, and the athletic director pulled me aside and he said, "You're a detriment to this school, you're a detriment to your teammates, and most importantly to yourself. We're not going to suspend you for 1 season. we're sending you home for good and we're taking your scholarship away. He said, we don't care about McDonald's All-American. We don't care about 2,000 points in high school. We don't care about Sports Illustrated. Go home and get your life together. I packed my bags and went back to Fall River, Massachusetts. But what was amazing was 4 months earlier, I sat in a room just like you're sitting right now. And I said, get this joker out of here, man. This is a waste of my time. And 4 months later, my scholarship's gone. I'm back in Fall River, begging the schools to take it. Waiting to go on national TV to play against UMass. I had no sleep. I had no food. All I'd done that night was bang lines of cocaine and drink beer. After the game was up against UMass on CBS, the athletic director called me into the training room and said something wasn't right about you. You need to take a drug test tonight. So I looked at the athletic director and I said, there's no need for a drug test. I'm going to fail it. The athletic director said there's going to be consequences. Tomorrow night we're going to have a press conference. And at 21 years old, you're going to look into all these cameras and you're going to tell these cameras that you have a secret drug problem that you had never addressed. But Fresno State's going to give you an opportunity. They're going to send you away to a treatment center for 28 days. So I jumped on a plane after the press conference and I flew to Salt Lake City, Utah. And I walked into this treatment center and I sat in rooms with 30, 40, 50-year-old men and women. And I kept saying, man, I can't believe Fresno State has me in a room with these crazy people. I'll never be these people. I'll never turn out to be these people. They're talking about divorce, they're talking about kids, they're talking about guilt. This will never be me, man. I got a bright future. So for 28 days I sat there and I wasted my time, I wasted their time. I kept my mouth shut. I jumped on a plane, I flew back to Fresno. I played in my senior season. In my senior season, my wife got pregnant, we got married, and little Chris was born. After that season was up, I was drafted in the second round by the Denver Nuggets. When I flew out to Denver for training camp, for the first time in my life, I had teammates like Antonio McDyess, Nick Van Exel, Chauncey Billups, Popeye Jones, Roy Rogers. Guys who had played in the NBA for many years who said, this is a very small window of opportunity. We know your background, we know your history, we know you have a drug problem. Therefore, we're going to treat you like a little brother. There'll be no drinking, there'll be no smoking. When we go on road trips, you're going to check in with us. See, I grew up with friends. And true friends to me were friends that kept their mouth shut. True friends to me, when I was acting like a fool, they kept their mouth shut. Now it's a whole different ballgame. I'm surrounded by guys that are going to tell on me. I'm surrounded by guys who are sacrificing themselves for me. And that season was the best season I ever had as a professional athlete. And after that season was up, I moved back to Fall River, my wife, my son. We bought a house, a couple of cars, and that summer I'm having a cookout. That summer I'm having a cookout, the kid I went to high school with walked into my backyard and said, Chris, man, take a walk with me. So I took a walk. And I went around the front of my house and he said, remember we were in high school, man, we used to play with the Perks. We used to play with the Vikes. He said, there's a new pill. And he reached into his pocket and pulled out this little Ziploc bag. And in this Ziploc bag was a bunch of little yellow pills, and he said, it's called OxyContin, at 40 milligrams at 20 bucks in Walmart. He said, Chris, man, it's like taking 4 Vikes. It's like taking 4 Perks. So I reached out my hand and put this little yellow pill in the palm of my hand, and I handed him 20 bucks. I looked at that yellow pill and I said to myself, once again, I'll try this once. I threw it in my mouth, I walked back to my cookout. I had no idea. I had no idea that decision, by the end of the summer, that $20 was going to turn to 25 G's a month. That 40 milligram pill was going to turn to 1,600 milligrams a day. I woke up on 1080s and I went to bed on 1080s. And when it was time to go back to training camp, I was a full-blown junkie. A full-blown junkie in 4 months. So I jumped on a plane, I locked myself in a hotel room in Denver, Colorado, waiting for training camp to start. I had been there 3 days, no food, no sleeping. And then the phone rang. And when the phone rang, I answered the phone, it was Rick Pitino. Rick Pitino said, congratulations, Chris. You're the newest member of the Boston Celtics. This must be a dream come true, being a Fall River kid There's only 6 people in the history of New England that can say they wore a Boston Celtics jersey. Get on a flight tonight, you got a press conference in the morning. I hung up with Rick Pitino, I jumped on my phone, and I called that kid who came to my lookout, the blue yellow pill. And I said, dog, I've been dog sick for 3 days. I got a press conference tomorrow at the Boston Garden. Be in the parking lot and wait for me. I walked into this press conference and there were cameras, photographers all over the room. And I held my Celtics jersey and I said, this is the proudest moment of my life. This is what I wanted to become my whole life. I played in every boys club, every age tournament, every YMCA in Massachusetts to have this moment. After the press conference up, I dropped that jersey. I ran into the parking lot. I grabbed my 1080s and I started this whole nightmare up again. I was playing in my 5th game as a Boston Celtic when Rick Pitino walked in the locker room. When he walked in the locker room, he said, tonight you're my starting point guard. And I'm sitting there beside of Paul Pierce, and Paul Pierce gives me 5 and says, come on, Chris, let's do this. Rick Pitino walks out of the locker room, Paul Pierce goes to warm up. I stay in the locker room, I jump on my phone, and I call that kid with the little yellow pill, and I said, my man, you gotta come up here before the game tonight, not after the game. I need to meet you before the game because without you, I can't play. And tonight, I'm a starter for the Boston Celtics. And without you, my body can't do it. So there was an hour and 10 minutes left on the clock. He jumped in his car from Fall River, an hour away from Boston. I went out and warmed up in front of 15,000 people. And when warm-ups was finished, I ran into the locker room, I picked up my phone, and with 8 minutes to go on the clock, he called it and said, I'm outside. I'm outside, but I can't come in, dog. You gotta come out. So I walked through the back door. I passed thousands of people coming into the building. I was in my full Celtics warm-ups. My first memory as a Boston Celtic in the starting lineup was me standing on a street corner outside Boston Garden waiting for my man to pull up. Waiting for him to pull up in the pouring rain, so I got my 1080s. I ran back into the arena. I came through the tunnel, I looked at the clock, and 2 minutes later my name was called from Fall River, Massachusetts, starting at point guard, Herren. Halfway through the season, Shaquille O'Neal landed on my shoulder. He tore my rotator cuff and fractured my collarbone, and I went into surgery. My career with the Boston Celtics was over. I got a phone call from the Dallas Mavericks that summer and said, we just traded Steve Nash. We think you could be a perfect fit at point guard. You want to sign a summer league contract? I signed a summer league contract, and we were playing in UMass Boston in the summer, and I had just finished my 5th game. I was leading the Boston Summer League in assists and scoring, and my agent was meeting with NBA teams, and they're talking about a 3-year deal around $8 million. As I walked out of the meeting, my agent said to me, all you gotta do is finish these 2 games up, and you're gonna be a millionaire. You finish these 2 games up, you're gonna be a millionaire. And I walked away, I went up to my hotel room, and that morning my phone rang. And when the phone rang, it was the guy with the little yellow pill brother who said, your man ain't making it tonight. You gotta figure something else out. He just got arrested. So I sat at the edge of my bed, and I looked at my son, I looked at my wife sleeping, I packed my Dallas Mavericks uniform, I walked down into the lobby of the Four Seasons, and as I'm boarding the bus, I turn around, I walk back into the lobby, and I shake Rolando Blackman's hand, the coach, and I said, sir, I quit. 800 milligrams of $8 million, fact. 800 milligrams wins every time. I jumped in my car, I drove to Fall River, I met another guy, I got my 800 milligrams. As soon as I got my 800 milligrams, I jumped back on the jack, I called him and I said, I apologize, give me a second chance, and he said, absolutely not. In the NBA Summer League, there's teams from all over the world that watch you play basketball. This team in Italy, one of the #1 teams in Italy, Bologna, Italy, called me up and said, we're going to offer you $50,000 a month in cash, no taxes, to play for our team. We're going to give you 2 cars, and we're going to give you a beautiful home for your wife, for you, for your son and your daughter. So I signed that contract and I flew to Bologna, Italy, and when I went to Bologna, Italy, I took 380s with me. And And I said, what I'm gonna do with these 380s, I'm gonna cut my milligrams down every day, and 3 months later, I'll be free of it. Except oxy don't work that way. And after 2 weeks, my 380s were gone. I woke up dope sick. I had practice in 4 hours. I jumped in my car. I drove to the bus station. I watched a man get off the bench and walk over to cars as they pulled up and throw things in the window. And after a half hour, I said, it's my turn. I pulled up. This little Italian man walked up to my window. I can't say Oxycontin in Italian. I can't say Percocets in Italian. All I could do was point to my veins. At 22 years old, I pointed to my vein, and the man nodded yes. I kicked open the passenger side door. He sat in and drove down the street. We pulled down an alley. The man looked at me one more time and he said, heroin? And I said, yes. He tilted his head back, reached inside his mouth. He grabbed the string that was tied to his tooth, and he started pulling out this string until the string was tied 15 balloons of black tar heroin that was down his throat. He pulled them all up and flipped them out. I told him I want all 15. I bought all 15 bags of black tar heroin, and I sat there and he pulled out a needle and he asked me if I wanted to shoot up. At 22 years old, playing professional basketball in Italy, I sat in an alley and I let this Italian man tie me off and stick a needle in my arm. What's amazing is, 4 years earlier, I sat in assembly, making fun of the dude with the microphone. 4 years earlier, I sat in assembly and said, what a joke, get me out of here. 4 years later, I'm in an alley sticking needles in my arms. Halfway through that season, the coach showed up at my door and said, we have training camp in the mountains. We have training camp in the mountains, so I extended my hand. I said, sir, man, it's been great being here, but I quit. Coach looked at me like, what do you mean you quit? I said, I want to take my family home. I walked away from $50,000 a month. I walked away from 2 cars. I walked away from a beautiful job because the man with the string tied to his tooth doesn't live in the mountains. And without him, I can't function. So I packed my bags, I moved back to Fall River, Massachusetts, and for the next 4 months, no hoop. And for the next 4 months, I pulled up to the same Dunkin' Donuts every single day and met the same dude and threw the same amount of money in his window. The dude was throwing the same amount of dope through mine. And every day I'd sit in Dunkin' Donuts parking lot and I'd sit there and I'd shoot the dope. I'd put my seat back and I'd wait 10 minutes. I'd let the dope kick in, I'd get in the drive-thru and I'd order munchkins for my kids and I'd walk into my house like daddy's home and everything's great. Except this day, as soon as I banged it, as soon as I did it, I felt something I had never felt before. And by the grace of God, I started my car and I jumped in the drive-thru immediately. I jumped in the drive-thru and the next thing I remember is glass hitting me in my face. A police officer screaming at me. Another police officer reaching over me and putting my car in park. After they put my car in park, they ripped me out of the car and laid me down in the cement in Dunkin' Donuts parking lot, a block away from my house. I looked up at the police officer. I said, what's the problem, officer? The police officer looked at me and he said, Chris, what's the problem? Look at your arm. And I looked at my arm. My arm was covered in blood and there was a needle hanging out of it. He said, Chris, you just overdosed and hit that woman in front of you. They brought me to the hospital, transferred me to jail. I bailed out 6 hours later. The first person I called when I got out of jail wasn't my wife, wasn't my mother, wasn't my father. The first person I called was the same man I just met now, Dunkin' Donuts parking lot. I was now a convicted felon at 24 years old. I was a heroin addict, and the next team that would take me was in Istanbul, Turkey. Istanbul, Turkey is punishable by life in prison if you smuggle drugs into their country. So I said to myself, I found dope on the corners in New York, in Boston, and Bologna. I'll find it in Istanbul. So I left the dope home and I flew. When I landed, I hit the streets and I couldn't find dope anywhere. Every morning I woke up and I walked the streets of Istanbul asking people for heroin and nobody would sell me. And every night I go back to my hotel room dope sick. And after 2.5 weeks of doing this, I jumped on the phone and I called that guy with the little yellow pill and I said, I just wired you 5 G's. FedEx me $5,000 worth of oxys. He said to me on that line, are you sure you want to put your name on this package, Chris? And I said, absolutely, and I hung up the phone. He called me back 2 hours later. He said, your package will be there in 7 days at your doorstep. What I did, Chris, is I taped it to the inside of the Boston Herald sports page. Nobody can feel it. So on day 7, I'm waiting for my package don't come. FedEx calls me and says, if you want your package, you better come to downtown Istanbul to the main office and come get it. In the back of my head, I said, this is a setup. I'm going to walk into this FedEx, and at 24 years old, I'm going to jail for the rest of my life in a foreign country. So I looked at my son, I looked at my daughter, I looked at my wife, I jumped in my car and I drove to the FedEx. I sat in the parking lot for a half hour. I opened my door and I walked into FedEx. When I walked into FedEx, there was a man with a gun to my right and a man with a gun to my left. I walked up to the counter and my package was 8 feet away, wrapped in yellow tape. As soon as I saw the yellow tape, I knew someone had gotten into it, so I turned around and I started walking out the building. As I was walking out of the building, the man with a gun stepped in front of me and said, go get your package. So I turned around and I walked over to the package, and as I walked over to the package and picked up the package, I clenched. I clenched because I was waiting for these dudes to tackle me. Nobody touched me. I turned around and I walked right in between the 2 men with the guns. I jumped in my car, I drove down the street, and I started ripping through the package. When I got to the sports page of the Boston Herald, there was no pills. I could see where the 80s were taped, or had been peeled off, and there was an envelope stuck. So I opened the envelope and it read, Dear Mr. Herren, when I was in high school, my father dragged me all over Massachusetts to watch you play basketball. I was your biggest fan, and it breaks my heart to see what you're up to today. I worked for FedEx in Boston. This package was put on my desk, suspected a drug smuggler. When I saw it was addressed to you, I had a dilemma. But I figured, because you have 2 children, I'd give you a break. Try to get some help, if not for you, for your wife and kids. I threw that package out the window. I drove to the roughest part of Istanbul, and I sat on the street corner for 8 hours, begging for heroin. 8 hours later, someone felt so bad for me, they walked me into their apartment and sold me heroin for the first time in Istanbul. I kept that man with me on my side for the next 8 months. After that season was up, I went on to play in 4 more countries, and one of the last countries I played in was in Warsaw, Poland. I had been there for 2 months, and the team looked at me and said, you know something? You're not who your agent said you were. Your highlight tape is nowhere near the same as who you are. Therefore, we're voiding your contract. In the 2 months that you've been here, we're not paying you. When I looked at the general manager, I said, General Manager, I got 2 children, you gotta pay me. And he laughed and he said, all we'll pay you is the flight home. So I said, well, do me a favor, don't fly me home, fly me to Fresno, California. So I jumped on a plane, I went to Fresno, California, and I called a kid that I went to college with who had a couple of stints in the NFL, who was the tight end at Fresno State. I called him up because him and I had the same problem. He was married to a Fresno State cheerleader. She was raising 2 beautiful kids, the same age as my 2 kids. He picked me up at the airport, his big Escalade, and I jumped in, he looked at me, I hadn't seen him in 4 years, he said, dog, you look terrible. I said, I feel terrible. He said, open up the middle console. I opened up the middle console, there was a ½ ounce of cocaine and a finger of black tar heroin. He said, if you want to get off now, there's needles in the glove box, and we can wait till we get back to my house. So I waited till we got back to this NFL football player's house. The house was half the size of this auditorium. And I pulled in and we were greeted by at the door by a 22-year-old girl named Lisa from Oklahoma. It was his personal assistant. Me and the former football player went into his living room and we speedballed for the next 5 days. We went from cocaine to heroin for 5 days straight. We locked ourselves in the bedroom for the last 2 days because we thought the police had the house surrounded. Paranoia set in, the shades were down. My wife was calling me every day and I wouldn't answer the phone, and on day 5 I answered the phone by accident. My wife said, "The kids miss you. We're in Chicago. Pick us up at the airport in Oakland in 2.5 hours." I dropped the phone. I jumped in the shower. I tried to shake this. I jumped in the car and I started driving to Oakland Airport. On the way to Oakland Airport, every brake light that got in front of me, every blinker that I saw, I thought they were boxing me in, so I pulled over for 10 minutes and waited. And after 6.5 hours of doing this, 4 hours late to pick up my wife and kids, I sat in a breakdown lane. I put the car on park. I stepped out in front of traffic, and I tried to get hit by a car. The car that I jumped in front of swerved at the last second. The car behind him stopped and called 911. As soon as I saw the police lights, I started running to the police. I wanted the police to just take me away and lock me up. I didn't want to be me anymore. I was tired of this nightmare of life. So they took my pulse and thought I was going to go into cardiac arrest. They brought me to Modesto County Hospital and then transferred me to Modesto County Jail. I woke up the next morning on the floor in the same jail cell with 40 men. When I woke up, I sat in there for hours, and then all of a sudden my name was called along with 5 others. "Yeah, I'm dope, Sid." He said, "Don't worry about it. Me and Lisa's going to come pick you up at 12:30. When Heather, little Christopher, and Samantha fall asleep, we'll be outside. Jump in the car. We'll go to my house. We'll get high. And we'll have you back by the time the kids wake up." As bad as I wanted to go for the first time in my life, I said no. I said, "Nah, man, I'm good," and I hung up the phone. He called me back at 1:30 in the morning. I looked at my wife, I looked at Christopher and Samantha sleeping in the bed, and I said, "I'm good." And I put the phone down. 5:30 in the morning, Heidi popped up on my caller ID. Heidi's the little cheerleader raising the 2 beautiful daughters, his wife. When I saw her name at 5:30 in the morning, I answered the phone and all I could hear was screaming in my ears. After 2 minutes, I finally said, "Heidi, what's up?" She said, "Were you with him last night?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Put on the news," and I put on the news, and all of a sudden his big house popped up, and yellow tape popped up, and blue lights popped up, and this woman stepped in front of the camera and said, "Last night, an unknown assailant at 2:30 in the morning kicked in the front door a former NFL football player. When they entered the house, they put former NFL football player on his knees with a 22-year-old girl from Norman, Oklahoma on her knees, and shot them both in the forehead and executed them." It was the first time I said no to drugs, and it saved my life. After the murder investigation, I flew back to Portsmouth, Rhode Island, and for the next 3 years, from the age of 29 years old to 32, I was a street junkie. My kids went to bed with no heat. My kids went to bed with no food. My wife shot and could card. Anything of any value in my home was stolen. Stolen by me. My kids' video games were gone. My wife's jewelry was gone. We lived in an empty house. On June 4th, 2008, I put little Chris on the school bus. I put Samantha on the school bus. I said, "Daddy will be here when you get off." But see, Daddy's routine at 32 years old, Daddy's routine is to walk up to the liquor store, get a pint of vodka, and then go stand in front of the 7-Eleven and watch people walk in and say, "That's the kid that used to play for the Celtics," put their cigarette out, and then go in and shop. And what I do is I run up to their cigarettes and I put it in an empty pack. That's what my life had led me to. But you know what's amazing is 12 years earlier, I sat in a room like this. Saying it would never happen to me, man. This dude's a joke. This is a waste of time. On June 4, 2008, I scrounged up $40. I drove to Fall River. I bought 5 bags of heroin. I stopped on Sign Street and I shot it. As soon as I shot it, I felt the same feeling I felt in Dunkin' Donuts parking lot, so I started my car. I don't remember driving. I was found 3 miles away from where I shot up. I went through a lane of traffic, jumped a curb, and crashed into a cemetery fence. When I woke up with sirens in my ears, and I was in the back of an ambulance, and when I woke up, I popped up off the stretcher, and a police officer grabbed me by my throat. He grabbed me by my throat, and he shoved me back down the stretcher. He told me to shut my mouth because I was just dead 30 seconds ago. He said, Chris, your skin was great, your lips were blue, and your eyes were rolled back, and you weren't responding to Narcan. So they threw you in the back of the ambulance, and you just came back. So they cuffed me and walked me into Charlton Memorial Hospital, where I used to be that guy. I was the guy in Rolling Stone magazine, 16 Minutes, Sports Illustrated, 2,000 points, McDonald's All-American, Boston Celtics, Denver Nugget, documentary, 2 books, reality show. And I walk in and now I'm just a junkie. They take one look at me and they said, let him go. 2 minutes the doctor spent. They uncuffed me, they summoned me. I'm walking out of this hospital in Florida, Massachusetts.